What's up, friends, and welcome to the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast, where each week we hope to raise the bar for youth ministry by asking questions, interviewing thinkers, just having some real, honest conversations about what it looks like for all of us to lead this next generation. I am Brett, and today I'm super excited to be joined by Crystal.
Hey there.
Chef.
Hey, everybody.
And Stuart.
Greetings and salutations.
Oh, good gracious.
The breath you took, I was expecting something with that was going to be boisterous and really energetic, and you were like, greetings and salutations.
Well, Crystal quoted scripture to us before we started this podcast. Yeah. So I'm feeling quite devotional.
All right. So who knows where this podcast is headed. The intent of this podcast, though, is that we're going to be talking through the question, how do we handle conflict in youth ministry? So on a scale of
big idea.
on a scale from comfortable to uncomfortable, how are you guys when it comes to the idea of conflict? Crystal?
Where does an anxiety attack fall on a scale?
Slightly below uncomfortable.
Yes, I'm in the negative scores on uncomfortable.
Okay. Chef?
I don't know. I just feel like as much as I hate it in the moment, I love to have been in conflict because normally something has happened. So, I'm stuck. So we'll go 5. Like, I hate it. There's bad conflict, there's useless conflict, and then there's super good conflict, So I don't know how to answer that question.
I look at it the way I think about working out. I absolutely hate thinking about it, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
And usually, much like working out, something incredible comes from it.
Yeah.
And as long as I keep that in mind, I can charge it. But I hate the idea of diving into it.
So what's the fear when it comes to conflict? So when we think about, when I think about especially my times in ministries, when I think about my tendency to want to send an email instead of have a conversation, or to want to say like, well, if it happens again, then we'll talk about it. Like what are the fears that cause that anxiety or cause us to really dread the idea?
I think this is a really good question, and it may be something we all should ask ourselves. I mean, I'm sitting there thinking while you're talking, what really is it for me that, is that, let's just let that go sort of thing. And there is some wisdom in letting some things go, right? I mean, choose your battles carefully, win them decisively.
Yeah.
That's one of the best parenting pieces of advice that I ever got. But for me, I think a lot of it goes back to the home I was raised in, where you do not fight, you do not cause trouble, maybe even a little bit of, who do you think you are to have an opinion, as a child, maybe some of that, or just maybe even as, I don't know. It's just, there's something in me that goes way back that I have to choose to overcome and move forward. So I don't know. What about you, Stuart?
Wow. I would my opinion would so coincide with what you're saying, because I think at the root of conflict is the reality that everybody has a narrative. Everybody has a story. And our default is always to believe that my truth is the truth. And when that bumps up against someone else who thinks that their truth is the truth, there is an impasse. But the harsh reality is that as hard as any of us sitting around this circle and those listening try to be empathetic, we can never be 100% empathetic, because I can't see things through Crystal's perspective. Right. Her narrative is different than mine.
Because mine's right.
Exactly. So we're forced to just, that's why it's work, because you're forced to keep asking questions and to keep trying and to fight for the relationship with this person, but also to fight to gain perspective. That's the uncomfortable part of conflict to me.
And my experience is almost the other side of that sometimes. So part of my neurosis is that I always assume other people are assuming the worst of me when that's just not reality.
That's great.
So for me, my fear of conflict a lot of times is that it's not going to go well. They're going to push back on this. They're not going to understand. They're not going to, whatever about this, or this. And so part of my temptation when it comes to conflict is just to yield that I was wrong. Hey, you know what? I didn't handle, which obviously we all know in leadership, we have to eat things sometimes we shouldn't have to eat, just because you have to own it. And you have to say, you know what,
Right.
deep down, I don't really know if this was my fault. Sometimes we have to do that. But when it comes to conflict, I think it's sometimes easier for me to deal with owning something that I probably shouldn't own.
Yeah.
Because I'm so afraid of that this is not going to go well, or I'm not going to say the right thing, or I just believe the absolute worst case scenario is going to come out, which, like, spoiler alert, like, it never really happens that way. It's always worse in my head than any sort of conversation I go into that I was fearful of.
My wife.
That's so funny.
You go ahead.
I do that too. I pre-apologize to avoid the conflict.
Yeah.
Like, I will fabricate a mini conflict on the front end and, like, pre-apologize, because I really just don't want to have the conflict, because I want people to like me.
Yeah.
And I assume if I'm not going to have the conflict, I'll have it in my head and win. But if I'm going to have it and I'm going to have a conversation, then I have the conversation in my head and I lose every time. Like,
absolutely.
It's a disaster every time.
My wife is quick to say to me, like, how far down the road are you with this conversation? Like you have no idea what direction this is going. So I am pre-deciding about, like 7 or 8 or 9 arguments down into the conversation, which rarely, never have actually happened. And and as you said, it's always way worse.
Yeah.
I don't know where I read this. I read it somewhere, but it's that idea of wherever there's an absence of data, we make up stories.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And fear fills in the gaps.
Totally.
And when you make up stories because of gaps, you create conspiracy theories. That's what a conspiracy theory is.
And then you react emotionally out of a fictional
fictional
reality.
narrative that's
reality.
that is so far away from what is actually true.
Yeah.
We had an intern here once who was so good at this, and she would say, this happened and the story I'm telling myself in the middle, and she would explain her story and go, is that right? And I was like, you are way better at this than I am. So good.
Yeah, so true.
So I went through an assessment process that one of the things that it talked about was this idea of conflict. And essentially it helped you measure, okay, when it comes to the way that you handle conflict, when compromise and yield were kind of the 3 things that it tried to categorize things into. The idea of, okay, when it's in conflict is the most important thing. Winning, and so I run people over in order to get what I want, or whatever the case is, or is it more of a conversation, and I'm willing to give, to take, but I still push forward based on what I believe is true, important, all those kind of things, or is it yielding, where I'm so just ready for there to be peace and for there not to be conflict, that I'm willing to even kind of compromise on the direction that I feel like this should go, or what I feel like this should be. And it came back like that I yielded too much. And so that's been a really helpful piece, just in that language for me of, okay, winning, yielding, or compromising. Obviously the healthiest part most of the time is in that compromise.
Yeah.
Is in that compromise
Do
piece.
you do that professionally and personally?
That's a good question.
I do that more at home. I yield it more at home, I think, than I do at work.
Yeah.
I do the opposite.
Do you really?
I yield a lot at work and will just fight to the death.
Oh, really?
For my point, yeah.
Yeah,
Dig the feet.
Sorry, honey.
I am a male crystal.
I would like that quote on a mug, please.
I will fight to the death at home, but I'm
hoodie.
much more yielding.
Interesting.
At
Okay.
work, you are.
So we're gonna have a little story time moment. So if you're willing, I would love for you to share a conflict story. So it doesn't have to be your worst or your best. What is a moment where you learned something about conflict because of a conflict that you were in?
Gosh.
I mean, for me, the worst conflict for me is when it's unnecessary conflict and it's my fault. Like those are the ones, like, conflict's important, but when I jump to conclusions or whatever, and I can remember the biggest fight I had at my last job was with someone I super respected and wasn't really close with, but he was in charge of a department, And one of my very close friends was in that department. And he didn't make any decisions, was my problem with it. He was pretty far away from it, and my friend was just getting hammered in this, this reality. And again, super poor move on my part. Instead of picking up the phone or instead of getting face to face, and we'll talk about this later, and instead of saying something like, hey, can you help me understand something?
Yeah.
I just texted, bad idea. For the record, it started with bad idea. I can no longer support basically you as a human being because,
Holy cow.
I mean, and it was so my fault in it. And he called me up and blasted me, probably more than he should. He would probably say he probably did. But I mean, it was as direct and loud a conflict as I had in my professional career. But but I triggered it. There's no doubt. But again, it was me overreacting, using text messages, and probably because a friend of mine was hurting, I was emotionally, I should have, I was probably a quiet time away from sending that text. I really needed to calm down. But that's when it goes worse.
Is there anything worse than when you send a text that you shouldn't, and the other person's emotionally healthy enough to call you? You're like,
Oh, no.
this is terrible.
That's bad even when it's not a conflict
Or
text.
show
like
up.
if you just
Right?
ask a question
Yeah.
and then you get a call. It's like, man, come on.
I
Just
should
text
have
me back
called
the
you.
answer.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've learned in conflict that I hate it. There is no secret about how much I hate it. But I have learned that there is no such thing as avoiding it. It's delaying it. And I remember we were at a work event, and there had just been tiny what should have been conflicts with a friend over and over and over. And I should have said something, and I should have said something, and I should have said something, and I didn't. And it erupted like backstage at an event. And it was, it was like a volcano level comparing that person to their worst enemy out loud. Great move. It was terrible. It was the worst. Crying, like just awful. Awful. And when it all came down to it, it was like, well, why didn't you tell me 6 months ago? Well, that would have been a much easier conflict
Yeah.
to have. 6 months ago, it would have been a 4-minute conversation.
Misdemeanors are a win in conflict, right?
Yeah.
That's good.
Because you're going to step on somebody's toes, especially when you work as close as we work, together a lot, or it's just going to happen. Families, for sure going to happen. So
I have too many to share. That's the problem, which probably says something about me personally. One very vulnerable thing that I'll share is that in my professional work, I had someone that I had a whole lot of respect for when I was walking off stage say something very derogatory about my communication style. And it sent me in a tailspin for like 5 years because I was unwilling to confront it. And what I did was I filled the gap with a conspiracy theory. And what it winds up doing is makes you incredibly unhealthy. The reason why I was comparing myself to a female crystal, although she is much more attractive, is that at home I won't do that. At home I will fight for truth. But for some reason, when it comes to professional things, especially when it's involving me personally, if it's you that is suffering, I will fight. I'll get there because I don't want you to suffer.
Yeah.
But like you, I'm willing to be the, I'll be the martyr, and that is wrong. I think if we're not careful, we can become incredibly unhealthy because we're unwilling to get to the root of what the issue is. So thanks for asking that really painful question.
Sorry about that, Stuart. What do you think it's important to know? We've kind of hit on some of this already. What do you think it's important to know about who we are, how we're wired when it comes to handling conflict in a healthy way?
I think we've hit on it a little bit. Like, we don't know the whole story, and if you can convince yourself that, one, I don't know the whole story. Two, my emotions may not match reality. Where you should honor your feelings and not trust them at the same time. I don't know if that's good advice or not. For me, that's kind of how, like, okay, I mean, I've had to learn to, like, okay, what was that? I need to pay more attention to that as opposed to just set them aside and not trust them. But I've also dealt with people who, reality is their emotion, and that's not a great way to live either. I'm sure there's some sort of scripture in there. Crystal?
On the spot.
Because I did a scripture for mic check.
Yeah. Walking concordance. Would you speak up?
One thing I think is helpful is just to recognize where your conflict training came from. Because I was just
such a good point.
looking at a study from Career Builder that says 58% of managers never received any management training, which means they received no conflict training. And so where do we get it? If we don't get it at work, we got it at home. Well, I was an only child. And so I've recognized over the years, part of my conflict issue is I just don't have a lot of practice. And so I've had to practice conflict to make up for what I missed at home. And I think everybody, whether you know, parents had a good marriage, bad marriage, a quiet conflict, loud conflict, we bring a lot of that with us.
Yeah, that's good. I would like to thank in advance Dr. Brene Brown for what I'm about to say. But I've learned recently, reading one of her books, this challenge that before, whether it's with your children, your spouse, a professional relationship, ask yourself this question: do you believe that this person is doing the absolute best that they can do? And that question is very unsettling, because if you answer no, then that's probably showing, like, if negativity is your immediate default, that's more of an issue with you. If your answer is yes, then it allows you to be a lot more empathetic and provide grace. And so I think those questions for me have been very helpful. She articulated something that I've been trying to do only in the last few years of, is this person doing the very best that they can do? And more times than not, honestly, the answer is yes. To Crystal's point, because so many of us, like, it's impossible to be 1,000% empathetic. Right.
Most people are doing the best that they can do. And even in their empathy towards your perspective, they're doing the best that they can do.
Right.
Which requires another question, do I have enough information about this to actually freak out? And if I do, is freaking out going to help?
Yeah.
And we get where that leads us. So it allows us to just kind of level out and center to actually try to accomplish something.
Yeah.
And this is, to me, this issue is a very important conversation as it relates to not only what we do professionally with other people in the office or at home, but what small group leaders are, the relationship they have with students and vice versa, the relationship that the youth pastor has with their small group leaders and vice versa. Because we're dealing with a generation who has so many triggers that if you're not careful, you could decide, I'm never going to touch really sensitive subjects. But what that means is that we send them into life and we've never really been their friend.
Yeah.
We've just kind of gone, well, we agree with everything that you do, and we haven't helped.
Yeah. For me, one of the pieces, kind of going back to kind of the yielding conversation, for me, what I have to do when I'm thinking through an issue with somebody or something and thinking through conflict, one of the filters that I have to work through is what is the purpose of the conflict? What will the conflict lead to? And for me, kind of one of the biggest driving pieces is kind of mission vision. That I know that if it's going to take some sort of conflict for us to be able to move in, a faster, healthier, better direction towards mission and vision, that's usually a driving piece for me. I can do that. If that's not the focus, a lot of times it's so much easier for me to yield, whether I should or whether I shouldn't. So for me, just knowing that is such a challenge for me is helpful for me to know, because Chef, like you said, like, yes, there are absolutely some things that, we should just be kind of like, okay, need to keep my eye on that, but I don't think I need to do anything about that right now. Right.
But it's so easy to just keep saying that over and over and over again until there's no boundaries left over here.
And feel good about yourself because you're so understanding.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. But you're not bringing to the whatever it is,
Yeah.
whether it's work or your family, like the true you,
Yep.
you know?
Can we lean into that a little bit? Because I think we all have heard a lot of language especially in Christendom, about this idea of choosing to trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I would
And-
love to lean into that.
Because in my opinion, there's another side of choosing to trust
Yeah.
that we don't really talk about.
Right.
Can you, because you've lived in that world forever.
Well, I mean, yeah, and that comes from Andy's idea and leadership. And we talk about the shadow side of Andy's teaching sometimes, because choosing to trust is what you do most of the time. But the shadow side of it, or the harder side of it, is until you can't, and then you have to have a conversation. In fact, that was one of the trainings you got on my team. If you started on my team, you would get a whole talk about trust is not earned, it's given, it's a gift, and you should respect that. And so we're going to give people our trust because they're on our team, and so we can keep moving. We're going to give them the benefit of a doubt until we can't, and then we're going to be adults and have a conversation and clear it up. Because if you don't clear it up, choosing to trust without a conversation leads to just pessimism. It leads to
Resentment.
gossip and resentment, and
it also avoids, to me, it avoids conflict, when sometimes the most trusting thing that I can do is to have a very difficult conversation with you.
Yeah.
Because I trust that I love you, and vice versa.
Yeah. No, that's great. And to be clear with Andy's teachings, like that is part of his teaching. It's just that people use his power phrases as excuses not to do something. Same with like choosing to cheat. You know, like sometimes
let's not come to
gotta
work
hard. You know, well, I'm choosing to cheat. Well, you're choosing to lose your job. You know, I've had older pastors, on planes be like, "Can you tell your boss to change the title of that book? I am tired of 23-year-old, people coming to me who just need to do some hard work, Right. Anyway, that's
so
a whole side issue. But
So for me, one of the things that has been most helpful in figuring out where I am with that, because I feel like I can't always trust myself to know, okay, is this
I
a
think that's a
conversation
great place
I
to
have
start
or not?
That's a great place to start with the conflict of like, hey, I am having a hard time sorting this out.
That's so
Can
good.
we talk about this?
Yeah.
Because if not, I'm going to create a conspiracy
Right.
theory.
Yeah. Maybe that needs to be part of our team's vocabulary.
And
Before I create a conspiracy theory, can we have a conversation?
Well, and
I'm
I
just
think having
confused.
people in your life that love you enough to tell you that you're wrong about something. And so like I've had people that I feel like I can process something with, and they can tell me like, you have to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Or you're kind of being neurotic about this. I don't think it's something that you have to worry so much about right now. So having those kind of people that you can trust, who kind of know your issues and how you normally handle conflict, and if you tend to jump right into conflict, that they can say like, yeah, you're jumping into this one a little bit quick. Let this one simmer a little bit. I think you're making a bigger deal than it should be.
Yeah.
I have to have those people too, because then when I tell them I'm thinking about the conflict, then they hold me accountable to actually
Having it, yeah.
instead of having it with them thinking about it and then never actually having it with the
And then your
person.
brain releases all the dopamine like you've already had the conversation
great.
and you feel better, but nothing has been resolved.
That's exactly what happened.
And if you shield yourself from all conflict, you stop growing.
Yeah.
If you open yourself up to every conflict opportunity, you become a whole of the butt variety.
Yeah.
So well, yeah. So it is about balance. And it is about surrounding yourself with people who you trust enough that are going to love you enough to go, I want to make sure I'm seeing this right. Is this correct?
Yeah. So what are some of the ways that we can recognize when conflict is healthy or when conflict isn't healthy?
I think running it by somebody. I spend a couple hours a month with a guy named Dean, and these are the sorts of things that are on my list. I'm like, all right, feeling some tension here. Do you think this is worth bringing it up? And then he helps me bring it up well. Like, one of my very many shortcomings is I speak harshly, especially when I'm passionate, and that comes from where I grew up, blue collar, Western Pennsylvania, where we are direct with each other. Well, I now live in the South, so
We're not direct till we want to murder you here.
Yeah, that's right. Bless your heart. It means I hate your guts. So what I've learned to do is I have to I'll tell people I'm not ready to have this conversation yet. I need to go sit down, and that usually doesn't work because they're like, no, we need to have it. And I'm saying, well, then you're going to need to, I'm going to verbalize some things I don't mean because I'm not ready to have this conversation. So if you'll give me that grace and help me think out loud, then I'm willing to have this conversation. So I have that conversation all the time with one specific person on this staff, where I was like, I'm not ready, but they keep pushing.
Right.
A lot of times people go, okay, let me know when you are. And I have to write out a sentence for myself. And that's just me. This is my thing. Like if I go into a conversation because I know I want to be a pleaser, or I'll know, I'll have 2 or 3 sentences that I have to say before I end the conversation.
That's so good.
Does that make sense?
That is good.
Yeah. And I love the like, am I ready to have this conversation? Like I've started asking myself questions like, am I willing to sit next to this person, or do I feel like I have to sit across from this person? If I'm willing to sit next to them, I'm in a good place. If it has to be across from them, I'm still not ready. Can I put the issue in front of us, or is the issue between us? Because if I can keep it in front of us, then we can deal with the issue. If it's a between us thing.
I'm trying to remember where we sat last time we had lunch.
You guys double up with booths.
That's right. That's right.
It's super weird when he's ready to have a conversation.
If you ever see Chef and I in a restaurant sitting beside each other, we're having conflict resolution. And then the other thing too is, am I willing to ask questions and try to gain perspective?
Yeah.
Or is there something in me that just wants to fight for my side?
Yeah.
I'm not ready.
You're not ready.
I'm not ready.
You're not ready to ask a question. That's good.
I have to put a lot of time into explaining, re-explaining, vocalizing, writing down even what the conflict is. Because I've learned when I get face to face with somebody, and if something gets heated, the amount of cortisol in my body rises and I can't think straight. I can't come up with words anymore. The brain shuts down. And so I just have to go over it enough times that there's no emotion left. Just have no feelings when you show up.
One thing you're saying though is important. Like, why are my emotions so heightened about this topic? Is there more to it than just this? Like, what's driving that? If that's one part of getting ready to have the conversation and own your part of it, and that's also a great place to start. Hey, I may be overly sensitive to some of these things, and that's not your fault, but can I have a conversation? At least you're giving people perspective of where the energy is coming from. Yeah.
I do this weird thing that I have to be careful of, where I don't like conflict. I'll yield from conflict. But when conflict is obviously existing in some way, a lot of times I want to rush into it because I want to get it over with. So like at home with my wife, we have, there's this all the time. Like I'm the one sometimes that pushes, no, we need to talk about it. Let's have this conversation. Yeah. But that's a selfish thing. That's a selfish thing because I don't want to have to worry about it anymore.
That's funny.
And it's not necessarily like I'm not excited. I don't want to rush into it. Like I don't want to have the conflict, but it's already there. Yeah. So a lot of times I make it worse by just trying, hey, let's have this conversation now so we can get to the resolution, and then I don't have to worry about this anymore.
Yeah, because maybe they're not ready.
Right.
On top of that.
And really I'm not ready. Yeah. I just want to jump into it. It's like, jumping in the cold water. Like I just want to jump in so I acclimate quicker. Sure. But like that's not necessarily going to lead to any sort of resolution.
But there's another side of that too, though. Usually when if we handle the conflict resolution correctly on the front end, there's usually only a few seconds of discomfort.
Yeah.
And I think it's those few seconds. It's kind of like once I jump in, it's going to be cold initially, but my body's going to settle down. It's the same way with conflict resolution. The initial, hey, I need to talk to you about something. Yeah. Once it gets out there, if you've handled it correctly, you go somewhere.
Yeah.
And you can.
I mean, if it's something new, I think you're right. If it's something that's been bothering you for a long time and all of a sudden you feel the need to have that conversation right now and you haven't done the work, you know what I mean? Maybe that's the difference. That's what a misdemeanor is, like this is a brand new thing, let's talk about it, versus...
So does that mean we need to be better at keeping short accounts?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Didn't the Bible say something about that? Crystal?
I thought Reggie Joyner said something about That's in the Bible?
Reggie 2:12.
Reggie 2:12.
Right.
Oh, gosh. One of the best pieces of advice one of our coworkers gave me when he was leading the team is he said, we just have to have a numerical number of how many times something bothers us because we'll just let it go if we don't. So the number is 2. If something I say or do bothers you enough times that you go talk to your spouse about it twice, yeah, come talk to me about it. And I was like, that was such a good check for me to go, okay, well, this is the second time I've complained at home.
Right.
I got to go have a
good check.
conversation.
Yeah.
That's good. To some degree, what we're saying, though, is that if you're going to lead from a place of integrity, you can't be quiet about difficult things. Like, silent leadership is not, I don't know if it's leadership.
Right. Yeah. That's good.
I mean, if you've got to charge hard, difficult things, but to do it with the love of Jesus and hopefully compassion and this attempt, the most difficult part to me is being empathetic toward the opposite perspective.
Yeah.
Or we're not really not leading.
Right.
What's the quote from Orange Tour that Reggie says right now? I've seen it a couple times about the church in the neighborhood, that if there's an issue in the neighborhood that we don't deal with, we forfeit
The credibility.
our credibility.
We forfeit the right to influence that community to some
right.
degree.
And that's probably true individually as leadership. Like,
Right.
you know, I mean, again, and I'm imagining sitting in my car listening to this and thinking,
What
well,
are they
my boss never dealt with. You got to realize your boss has a huge world and a list of things,
And they may
they're
be
checking
doing
them
the
off.
very best that they can.
Yeah. And which is another great way to start the conversation, right? Trying to understand their perspective. But, you know, just because they haven't dealt with it right now doesn't mean that they're not going to. It just might mean, I mean, you have no idea what you know what I mean? Their world is so big and they're dealing with some really hard stuff. So, but.
And you don't know what they're dealing with personally.
Yeah. But as a leader, you should think, what am I ignoring?
Yeah. How do you guys see this equating with teenagers?
I think we have to teach teenagers how to have conflict with each other, because
I agree.
Our temptation is to fix it as the adult in the room, and they come to us asking us to fix it as the adult in the room. And there's a biblical model for conflict. If I don't teach them that, if I don't teach them to have conversations with each other, I'm not doing my job. So we've had a lot of sit downs, and I'm always offering to be there. I'm happy to be there. I don't have to be there.
Right.
But you two've got to figure this out.
Right.
Here are tools I would use if I were you.
Or even to take it a step further, like I'm thinking about the small group leader that maybe listens to this, and they have a teenager in their small group, and they've built this incredibly strong relational bridge, but they don't trust it enough to have a really difficult conversation about a behavior or a thought process.
Yeah.
What I would love to know, like, your perspective on that as it relates to conflict. Because in some regard, we are graduating ducks into an eagle world because we haven't had those difficult things, those difficult conversations. And then there's a very famous coach in the world that talks about the reason why I coach them hard is because life is hard. And when they get into the real world and have a boss and, you know, there's a difficult conversation, this kid will fall apart if, you know, so
Nobody
that kind
told
of
them
thing.
truth. No, I think that's a great thing that's one of the things that we can, you know, show them and that they can actually feel. I think it was, you know, we would use the phrase, build a relational bridge strong enough to
support the
to
truth.
support the truth. And that's what you're doing as a small group leader. But that, again, the dark side of that is eventually you have to sit down. But there's an amazing lesson for a student in that. And maybe they've never heard hard truth, especially this generation that's coming up. But you hear hard truth and then we're the same. Or like our relationship is still good.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, that's...
So in some regard, you're modeling.
Right. You're modeling.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm disappointed, but I still love you.
Yeah.
I feel like I would have made a decision different than you, but I still love you. Or, as Crystal was saying, like modeling, like you sit down and you say, hey, can you help me fill the gap here? Because I hear what you're saying in small group, but I also hear that there's some of this going on.
Right.
Can you help me understand the in-between? And again, it may be good news, it may be bad news. I'm sure that they'll try to fill it with fake good news at first because they're not good at, you know, and you just keep chipping
Did you just
away.
say fake news?
Fake, I do. Say fake good news.
Fake good news.
Fake good news. Anyway, I just think that's a really great point. Or I mean, the other thing that I always would try to do, especially with parents, because a lot of times in a small group situation, you've got two parents and they've got you as the medium through them.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I do is ask for everybody to get in the same room.
Oh, that's good.
Because, I mean, you argue different when you see somebody's eyes,
Yeah.
right? Or you're stuck in the middle of an email stream. You know, the first thing I do is get it off of email, you know, and at least hear each other's voice. And a lot of times they won't come in. Well, then I'm not going to mediate an argument
Yeah.
that you're not big enough to come,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And at that point, you know, I feel like, well, unless you can come in, I can't be the middleman on this. I've written that email or had that conversation several times. And many times they never did come in. But it did eliminate it from my world, which was great. But
How
because
to
of our
avoid
positions, we get drawn into the middle of that stuff all the time, and we've got to be better stewards of our time and learn to identify it, you know, because the pleaser in us goes off where we're trying to make everybody happy, and that's not realistic either.
Yeah.
You know?
I saw our church do such a good job of this a couple of years ago. Some parents were upset about an event we had in our small group where, sadly, I wish I'd been there. I would have made the same mistake. My co-leader showed a movie.
Well, that's the first problem with your small group event. You weren't there.
Good gracious! No, I would have made the exact same mistake. My co-leader showed
Show
a
up
movie
consistently.
and she thought you are such a jerk.
I am a hole of the butt variety.
I'm going to quote scripture.
Awesome.
Yeah. No. So my co-leader, she shows a movie that she thinks the rating's different than what it is.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
Tough
Been there.
moment.
Been there.
So parents go to the church, and the church says, that's a great concern. I need you to go to that small group leader and
Yeah.
have a conversation with her in person.
Yeah.
So then the parents came to me.
Right.
and because I'd seen the church do, I was like, oh, I see what's happening here. No, you need to go to the person you're upset with. I'll go with you.
Yeah.
I'll sit there. But you need to go to the person. And then what was great was the girls got to watch that too.
Oh, that's
They
good.
got to watch the parents work out something with a small group leader. They got to see the small group leader, who they love and adore, apologize and say, hey, I made a mistake. And they get the skills of apologizing. And it was better for the girls what happened than it was
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
adults. But I think they've got to see us work out conflict together.
Yeah.
Well, especially when right now, conflict is not a foreign concept to the culture that most of us live in.
it's not.
Healthy conflict.
Or conflict resolution is absent.
Yeah. And so helping model for them, like we're saying, I think it is such an important piece for them to see, that conflict is something that you can work through, not necessarily. I mean, I feel like conflict is just like a lifestyle with the way that kind of media is right now, and everything is so partisan and one-sided, and everything's just kind of back and forth. And so, to an extent, there's a level of peace that we won't help our students understand how to live out of in their relationship with God if we don't give them some sort of an indication of healthy ways for them to handle what it looks like to have a disagreement or an argument, or to be able to put things aside, or to put ourselves to whatever it looks like.
So there's a youth worker listening, and they are not good at this, but they want to model it. So practical. I mean, what have you learned, Stuart? You've been around for 7 or 8 decades.
Third shot taken again. I agree with what Brett's saying. I think it is so important for us. First of all, we need to embrace the suck because it is absolutely awful.
There's another quote I'm going to put on a mug.
It's absolutely awful. Thinking about it, waking up and realizing today's the day it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Driving to the meeting, it's awful. But if we can be humble and gentle and attempt to gain perspective and fight for it. And I think this is a big thing. It probably isn't going to happen in one meeting sometimes.
Right.
Like, you don't plant the seed and eat the fruit in the same day. And so consequently, don't go in with an expectation of, well, this is going to be immediately resolved and we're going to be the best of friends forever and ever. Amen.
Well, you can do everything totally right and it not end, because this is not all your responsibility. We tend to
Correct.
you know, it's the other person's got to handle it well as well. And so that's our job,
Yeah.
is to realize and kind of come to a place where my job is to be emotionally not detached, but
Right.
honest
Right.
about it. My job is to be humble. My job is to remind myself I don't know the whole story. My job is to not jump to conclusions, and you know, and to be as gracious as I can in the conversation. But my job is also to, you know, read those 3 sentences, whatever it needs to be said, is to say it. And I would spend some time making sure those sentences are you know, crafted carefully as well. Again, with humility, but honest. You know,
honesty is the best policy. But if your honesty is masking shame, guilt, and ridicule, that's not honesty. That's shame, guilt, and ridicule hiding under the premise of honesty. And so I could not agree more with your point there. That's why it's good to write down your 3 sentences.
Right. Well, I'll give you one example where I messed up, and I had a great, wise friend who came back to me. You know, he said something in a conversation passing, and I said to him, what did I say? I'm so disappointed in you that you feel this way, blah, blah, blah. And he came back to me and he thanked me for the feedback, and then came back to me a couple of days later. He said, thanked me for the feedback again. He said, hey, can I give you some advice? And I was like, sure. He goes, if you just would have said, from what you said, it felt like, as opposed to, I'm disappointed you did this because he said that would have opened up the conversation in a whole new way, because what you read it wrong. He said, I said it wrong and you read it wrong. Had you just approached it with a couple of words of, hey, it appeared to me, I felt like something like that's based on what you said. Is that what's going on? He said it would have been a whole different conversation. So,
well, isn't that always like the joke that people make about therapy? Like, you use feel language. Well, I feel, and people make jokes, but that is such a helpful.
I feel when you, because that's like one of, I think that thought all the time. I feel. And that's the hardest part. I'm not sure what this is. It's not just anger. There's more to it. That's my profile. I'm learning from the Enneagram. I'm an anger-based personality. I feel when you, whatever it is. And then the because part is actually where you actually, a lot of times, because when I was a kid, this happened to me and it brought up bad feelings. Which has nothing to do with the person at all. You know?
And let's not let's not downplay this. Everything we're talking about takes a tremendous amount of courage. This is not kiddie play at all, because our culture is full of so many people that just deflect and live in anger and shame. And the scary part for me is that we're also bringing up and investing in a generation that, I mean, you nailed it. They don't know how to handle conflict. Crystal nailed that. They don't have difficult
they live
conversations.
In an either-or world.
If we could do anything for the next generation, could we help them see that the world is not either or, false dichotomy?
That's the beginning. Yeah, that's the beginning of critical thinking, passing either or, right? So that's Brene Brown as well, I believe. It's a good
Thank
quote.
you, Dr. Brene. We appreciate you.
We should have her on the podcast.
Yeah, we should. We should try.
So one of the things I decided pretty early into ministry is I was going to be a really easy person for people to say no to. Because I mean, we know in ministry, you ask a lot of people to do a lot of things. And most of the time, the answer is going to be no, or it doesn't really work out for me right now, whatever the case is. And so I decided really early that was going to be, you know, at the risk of that becoming too easy for people to say no to me, that when people said no, that I was going to talk about, hey, you know, I love when people have boundaries and they respect them, or whatever the case is. And I think that there's some reality when it comes to this idea of conflict too, is I want it to be as easy as possible for someone to confront me about something. And so I want anytime someone's, you know, I would hope, obviously, who knows if I do this well or not, but if someone, you know, says like, hey, can I, you know, can we talk about something? Hey, can I give you some feedback about something you said as you were leading that meeting, or, you know, this thing that I overheard you say to this person, or something like that. Like, you know, the humility side of things, all of those pieces, like I want to, because that person probably had that same day that you were talking about. They went to bed thinking about it. They woke up thinking about it. And I want them to experience that kind of, that just flushing of fear when they bring up that conversation with me that I want to experience when I have to have that difficult conversation
Right.
with someone else. And so obviously I think there are so many practical things that we can think of when it comes to what does this look like when I try to confront somebody about some different issues. But it's also how am I confrontable? How do I respond to people when they want to have those difficult conversations with me?
That's so good.
Crystal, I've heard you talk about kind of a practical thing that you learned somewhere along the lines that is fascinating. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So I have a friend named Becky Kaiser. Becky is such a great human being. And one of the things I really respect about her is that she has conflict and she likes it. And not she likes it because she's mean, but she said, I like it because it's productive and it doesn't scare me. And so one day I said to her, can you just teach me what you know? Because I don't have that experience. And she said, well, I use sometimes what's called the OIC method. And the O is simply observe. And you tell the person, this is what I observe. As objectively as I can. This is what I saw happen. This is what I heard you say. This is what I observed. The I is how I interpret it. And so I noticed you're not coming to work, and I interpret that to mean this. Or I noticed that you didn't show up to my meeting, and I interpret it to mean that. And then the C is asking the person, can you clarify if I'm interpreting it correctly?
Yeah.
And so, hey, I noticed that you rolled your eyes in a meeting. I interpret that to mean you hate my guts. Can you clarify, do you actually hate my guts? That sort of, I see. And usually the person will clarify and say, no, that's not what I meant at all. And it's such a low impact way to have conflict.
Yeah.
So
That's so good.
OIC, observe,
interpret,
and clarify.
I love the word interpret
Yeah.
because it's just
subjective.
Yeah,
It
it's
owns the
subjective,
subjectivity.
and people can put their guns away,
Right.
At that point, because you're going to get an opportunity to clarify.
Yeah.
So-
And that's how we fill the gap.
Yeah.
Like I saw you roll your eyes. The way that I filled that gap is you rolled your eyes at something
Because you
that
hate
I
my
said.
guts.
But what really happened is they got a text. They looked down at that text and they were responding to the text. A lot of times it doesn't even have anything to do with what in our minds we filled the gap with. Because again, at least me, what I tend to not fill the gap with the most positive things.
Right.
But with kind of what are the worst case scenarios, whatever kind of makes it worse for me.
Yeah.
What else? Any other resources that kind of before we wrap up the conversation that you would say, hey, if you haven't checked out, this book or this has been a helpful thing for me when it comes to conflict?
I would say 2 books that have equally kicked my butt, and I can't employ everything they say. One of them is called Radical Candor by Kim. Trying to remember what Kim's last name is. It starts with an H. We'll put it in the show notes. But Radical Candor is just being more honest than I really want to be. And then I had to read Level 3 Leadership by James Clausen for a class. And it's been really helpful. It talks about finding people's values, expectations, beliefs, and assumptions, and using those from a place of conflict. Both of those have been really helpful.
Daring to Lead, Dr. Brene Brown. She talks about, very similar to what you were just saying, that clear is kind, unclear is unkind. When you're clear, you're being kind. When you're being unclear, you're not being kind. So, such a helpful book.
That is
Awesome.
I am so unkind.
That was clear.
Here's a clear title: How to Have That Difficult Conversation.
Oh, wow.
By Henry Cloud and John Townsend. So it's a great, very practical. It's got some exercises similar to the OIC stuff that you just walk through and prepare, and it's a lot of considering the other person's perspective. It's good stuff.
Yeah, Crucial Conversations is one for me that has been really helpful. So we'll make sure all those end up in the show notes because no one that's listening to this is probably going to read all those. But maybe you just look at all of them on Amazon and you decide which one of those might be the most helpful. All right, any last words before we sign off for that person who's listening and they know the conversation they probably need to have, and now it's even deeper in the pit of their stomach because they're like, oh gosh, I just listened to this podcast. I got to have this conversation. Any last thoughts as we wrap this up?
Pull over your car, send the text to set up the meeting.
Oh, that's so good.
Because
good gracious.
30 minutes from now, you will not care as much as you do right
That's
now.
true.
So
But
do it
be
right
sure
now.
to pull the car.
Pull the
over.
car over.
Especially
car
in
over.
Georgia with the
Yeah, especially in Georgia. Yeah.
no. What is it? No
Hands
Hands
free.
free law.
No hands.
No hands law.
Not allowed to drive with hands anymore.
That's terrible. I think mine is just be realistic about the win. I know you're fantasizing about everybody agreeing, but the win is for you to communicate well, for, to give the other person an opportunity to communicate well, and then you're done.
Yeah.
But if they don't handle that well, and then sometimes you're just a person under authority and your authority disagrees with you and you've got to walk away, but at least, and that's how it ends. Like, I'm a person under authority. I will support that decision.
That's good.
And you have to walk away, but you've got to be realistic about the outcome, and you only control so much of it.
Good. Easy learning never equals strong skills.
Ooh, easy learning never equals strong skills.
If you avoid because you want it to be easy, you'll never be the greatest version of the person God created you to be. So it's going to be hard, but embrace the suck. And the second thing that I would say is, Crystal, earlier I observed that you called me a jerk. And I interpreted that we have an issue. And I would like some clarification.
I would like to clarify that I do not think you're a jerk.
You're just
I thought you were
acting
being
like a jerk.
funny. You had a jerk moment. You were not. That is not a reflection on your character, Stuart. I believe the best.
See, we just did a case study on air. It's amazing.
Also, I could never be angry at someone wearing a hoodie like the one you're wearing right now.
We'll put that in your show
will be in
notes.
the show notes.
with the hood on during this whole podcast.
Yeah, and
we're indoors.
And the
hood
longer
on.
we've gone, the hotter it's gotten. So, I forgive you.
My
by the way.
last piece would be find that person that you can have those conversations with, who's going to be honest with you, to say, who knows you well enough to know how you normally handle conflict. CJ's literally taking the picture of the hoodie right now for the show notes. Find that person who knows you well enough to know, you know what, you're going to want to try to avoid this, but I think this is worth having the conversation.
Yeah.
They can kind of walk you through, where you should go from that point. Find that person.
So good.
All right, so this is another awesome, fun, uplifting conversation that we get to have around this table, but honestly one that I hope is helpful and is life-giving, even at the same point if the pit in your stomach is growing bigger and bigger, because there's a conversation that you need to have. And so if you want to learn more about these resources that we've talked about, please make sure that you head to rethinkingym.org. And if you want to chime in on this conversation, then we would love for you to join us on our Facebook group. We're going to be jumping into that conversation this week there too. That link is also in the show notes. Until next time, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us.